Okay, I've been asked to talk a little bit about the difference between the E-2 Non-immigrant Investor Visa and the EB-5 Immigrant Investor Visa. Obviously, the main difference is the non-immigrant E-2 does not give someone permanent resident status. It has to be renewed generally every 2 years. On the positive side, there's no limit to how many times the E-2 can be renewed, but it does not lead to permanent residency or to eventual U.S. citizenship. On the other hand, the EB-5 Immigrant Investor grants permanent residency right off the bat, assuming you meet all the qualifications. The initial EB-5 is conditional, meaning the permanent resident status is only valid for 2 years. At the end of that 2-year period, you have to file some additional documentation to show that you are still maintaining your investment and that the investment has met all of the requisites set out by the Immigration Service. Assuming those are met, then your conditional permanent resident status becomes permanent, truly permanent, and from there you're on the road to becoming a U.S. citizen. Okay, so what is the difference in the required qualifications? For the E-2, it's formerly known as the Treaty Investor Visa. The bottom line to begin with is there has to be a treaty between the United States and your home country. There are various treaties that the U.S. has signed over the past 2 centuries to promote commerce, navigation, and investment between our country and others. And if your country does have such a treaty or agreement with the U.S., then there is likely an E-2 visa possibility for you. We do a lot of E-2s from Canadians based on the North American Free Trade Agreement. We've done E-2s for people from Germany, from the United Kingdom. There are a lot of countries around the world that have these treaties, but you have to make sure not all countries do. Okay, if the treaty is in place, then you have to show that you have the same nationality, basically by showing your passport to identify your citizenship. And the business that you invest in the United States has to also be considered to have that same nationality. What that means is if you're investing only 25% ownership into the business, then the other owners, or at least 50 to 51% of the ownership of that business, has to be held by other citizens of the same country. And it's also important to note those other investors cannot have obtained U.S. permanent residence. If they have their green cards already, even though they're still citizens of your country, they will not be counted towards the nationality of the company. Okay, the basis for the E-2 visa is investing a substantial amount of your own funds into a commercial enterprise in the United States. It's nice if the investment creates jobs, but there actually is no specific black and white requirement that jobs be created. We've done E-2 visas for people that they had a small company, it was a profitable company, but they actually didn't employ any American workers. So it's always helpful if you do, but it's not a requirement. The main issue that the Immigration Service or that the U.S. Consulate, if you're applying for the visa overseas, will be looking for is whether this is a business that is likely to produce a substantial return on your investment. And the first requirement in that area is referred to as the substantiality requirement. And that cuts in 2 different directions. First of all, your investment must be a substantial amount of the total capital that is required to get this business enterprise off the ground or to keep it going. If the business is one that does not require a lot of capital, you will be required to invest almost the entire amount yourself. For example, a computer repair facility doesn't really need much more than an office space and some office equipment to get started. Not a whole lot of capital, and as a result, You probably wouldn't be able to do that if you're only going to be a 1/4 owner of the business. You would need to own a larger and be investing a larger proportion of the amount that's necessary. On the other hand, if you're going to be investing in a factory that's worth several millions of dollars, you could get in for a smaller proportion of the total amount. What they're really looking for here is to make sure that you're investing enough money that you are going to have a personal stake in making sure this business is successful. They don't want to be giving out visas for businesses that are going to fold in the next year or so. Okay. You also need to show that the investment is going to likely produce a good return, that it will be actually something that will build wealth. It's not sufficient if you're only going to be able to draw enough out of this business basically for it to be a job. It's got to pay for your expenses at the level that a normal salary would, and have money left over to put in the bank and build up your own personal wealth. The funds that you invest have to be your own personal funds. They can't be money that you've borrowed from a bank unless that loan is secured itself by your personal funds. You cannot have if you're doing this with loaned money, the loan cannot be secured by the assets of the business that you're investing in. You have to have a personal stake in the matter. One of the most common questions that we're asked is, how much money do I need to invest? What's the minimum amount? And there really is no bright line minimum amount. We've done E-2 visas successfully for as little as $30,000. I wouldn't recommend that. We were very happy that they were approved. Took a lot of work, but generally at least $100,000 or more is what we would recommend. But there really is, you can't judge the likely success merely by the amount of money that is being invested. The heart of an E-2 is the business plan, just like if you're applying for a bank loan. The bank is going to be loaning you money. They want to be convinced that this business is going to fly. And the same thing when you're applying for the E-Visa with the Immigration Service. They want to make sure that you know what you're doing, you've got a plan, and this is likely to be a success. So that's a quick overview of the E-2. Again, non-immigrant. The E-2 status is good for 2 years, and at the end of 2 years it has to be renewed again. But there's no limit on how many times you can renew it, as long as you continue to show that the business is still viable and it continues to generate a good return on your investment. So moving over to the EB-5, the investor visa, the immigrant investor visa. The basic premise is fairly simple and seems to be straightforward. If a foreign national wants to invest $1 million or $500,000 in certain areas where there is very high unemployment, and their investment of $1 million will create 10 jobs for U.S. workers, they can get a green card. From that very simple sounding premise, however, the Immigration Service and the process of analyzing these over the years has turned into one of the most incredibly complex immigration areas that we're aware of. It doesn't mean they can't be done, but they take a lot of work, a lot of effort. You really need people helping you that know what they're doing. So to begin with, for the EB-5, we have to decide where your investment is going to be. It has to be what's called a new commercial enterprise. New meaning something that was originated after November of 1990, which is when the law was passed that created the EB-5. And if that is located in an area with high unemployment, specifically more than 150% of the U.S. national average, then it will likely qualify as a targeted employment area. And in a targeted employment area, the investment can be done for as little as $500,000, $500,000. Outside of a targeted employment area or an area that has been designated as rural, the investment has to be $1 million. So you've identified the location, you know whether you're going to need $1 million or only $500,000. The next thing we need to do is prove that the funds you're investing are your personal funds, that you have ownership and control over them, and that they came from lawful activity. The Immigration Service does not want to funnel money laundered drug proceeds or any sort of ill-gotten gain into this program, and so they're fairly rigid about ensuring that the money has a trail that we can trace back at least 5 years to show that it was legitimate funds. The funds have to be completely and irrevocably committed to the project. It's possible to use an escrow scheme so that if you don't get your green card, then you would get the money back, but that money will then be tied up. It will not be available to the investment or the development project until the green card is issued. But other than that, there can be no conditions. Your funds have to be completely committed to going forward with the particular project that you've invested in. And most important, you need to have a business plan, a very good, solid business plan that shows not so much that this is going to produce a good return on investment, which was the key issue with the non-immigrant E-2, but in the EB-5 category, you've got to show that your investment in this new commercial enterprise will create at least 10 jobs for U.S. workers. And those need to be full-time jobs, and they cannot be, you may use shared employment where one or more employees share the same position. But you can't take 2 part-time jobs, glue them together, and call it a full-time position. It has to be 10 full-time positions, 10 jobs that could be filled by 10 workers. That's a really quick and dirty overview of the EB-5 Immigrant Investor. Again, the basic premise: invest $1 million or $500,000 in certain areas, create 10 jobs, get a green card. The actual implementation through the Immigration Service, much more complicated. This is not something to walk into lightly. It takes a lot of work, a lot of good solid planning, and you definitely need professionals to give you guidance and advice along the way. So just to wrap up, we've talked about the EB-5 Immigrant Investor, which leads to a green card, the emphasis being on investment of a specific amount of money, $1 million or $500,000, and the creation of 10 jobs, as opposed to the E-2, the Non-immigrant Investor Visa. No specific dollar amount required. The main focus is on first having a treaty between your country and the United States that provides for E-2 visas, and then investing in a business that will produce a good solid return on your investment, something that will continue to make money and build your personal wealth. And that pretty much wraps up the summary.